Welcome back, everyone. Got a question for you, and the question for this video is going to come in right from the start. I don't know if you were watching me yesterday when I was talking about gluing and clamping pieces of board together to get the cheese board project. Well, I did that yesterday. I happened to do it on this particular board here. The last segment of that, I was applying glue to this board, and I mentioned something to you about being smart and using your head. I showed you that I put glue on the edge here, the edge here, the edge here, the edge here, and then when we came to the point where you had the handle, instead of putting glue all the way across the entire handle, what I did was I said, let me think ahead. And instead of putting glue and not knowing where it ends because of the length of this particular piece of walnut, what I did was I said to you, well, put glue on this side as opposed to the opposite side. We were always working on the side that was away from me, so I put glue on the part that was closest to me on that edge. I did that on this piece, and then what I did was when I went to the next piece, I went to the outside again and the outside again to complete gluing up. Thank goodness I made another project, because as I was making this other project, this other cheese board, I did the same exact thing here. So did anybody notice what I did wrong on this piece? That's your question. What did I do wrong when I was gluing this up? You might have to check yesterday's video to see the exact sequence. But something was unusual on this. I realized it when I was gluing this project together, and I went back and I corrected my problem. So you're gonna tell me what I did wrong and what my problem was yesterday. Today I have two cheese boards. I wanted to purposely make two to show you what you can do with a board that's wider if you make it a different size. And what I also wanted to do is use different materials, so you could take a look at two different materials, and as I said to you yesterday, use your own personal choice as to the materials that you want to choose. Today what we're going to do is we're going to clean these up. Right now there's glue on the surface of both of them. What I want to do is I want to clean this up to make sure that I don't have any glue on the surfaces, and that's both surfaces, because I plan to use both surfaces on both of these cheese boards. Remember the template that we talked about yesterday? I made this because there's going to be a whole bunch of people who make this project, not just one. Even if it was me and I was going to make 5 or 10 of these, I would still make a template. That way it's easier to trace it instead of trying to lay it out on every single cheese board that you make. If you know that there's a project or an operation that you have to use multiple times, always try to make it easier. Cut yourself a spacer block, or maybe make a template. Always think ahead. And like I said before in the other videos, the thinking is the hard part. And sometimes the stinking is the hard part too. Let's look at these cheese boards. They're still clamped up. I haven't broken them down. This to me is an easy thing if I were just to take these out of the clamps and go over to the work table and to start to clean these up. But right now, these are positioned really tight. I'm going to use my noodle a little bit and say these are clamped down probably as well as I could clamp them down. I'm going to start the cleaning up process by scraping these. Now there's several ways that you could do this. I could either use a chisel, I could use a hand plane, or I could use a paint scraper. I could use a chisel if I wanted to. I could use a hand plane. I could use a paint scraper. Let's see how they work. I'll come back to the scene of the crime. I'll take this chisel and I'll try to clean this up. And you're going to notice something. This is a Royal Paint in the can. If I try to move this up against here, it doesn't clean up very well. Most people would say, hey, use the hand plane. The hand plane, I found out, is the most difficult thing for a kid to get acclimated to, because with the hand plane, You're using the chisel. You also have to develop that rhythm of bending your knees, putting pressure forward, lifting pressure off of the back. So it's more of this sort of motion. And everyone has an issue with this until you get really comfortable with using this just as a matter of time. I find out that the easiest thing to use is an ordinary paint scraper. These are the paint scrapers I like to use. The best part about the scraper, it's as simple as can be. There's an edge here that I went over to the grinder on and I sharpened it. So I know that this is pretty clean and pretty sharp. I'm just going to go across the surfaces and I'm going to try to take out as much of the yellow glue as I can. Because as I said to you, glue hardens into a hard plastic. When it hardens and you try to machine it either on the jointer, table saw, surface planer if you're lucky enough to have one, that glue that has dried to a hardness as a rock, when you send it through, will always dull up the machine that you're working on. So we want to try to take off as much of this as we possible. And with a paint scraper, we're really not injuring a tool. This is what this is supposed to do. I know you're going to look at this and say this is a silly, stupid thing, but if you don't wear safety glasses, this is the time you want to wear them. Because when I'm going across here, if there's any raised parts of glue, that glue is going to be hard, it's going to be plastic, and if I get one of those in my eye, it's going to hurt like heck. And years ago, before I was a wise man, I used to do this all the time. I told you the other day about dropping a can of polyurethane on top of the table saw, looking down and having it splash in my face. That was one eye-opener. Another eye-opener is when I started to scrape my boards without a pair of safety glasses. And when you do this and something comes up and hits you in the eye, it's always a disaster. So I'm going to put my safety glass on when I do this. The board hasn't been moved. So what I'm going to try to do is clean this up while I have it clamped up. So I'm going to take the scraper. I always take the scraper and kind of keep it at a slight angle. And what I'm going to do is pull back and put pressure as I'm pulling back. Nice work, cameraman. As I go across here, you notice that I'm taking off some material. But I can hear this right there take off those high spots of that yellow glue. Now the question becomes, can I get all the glue off? Well, the idea with this is I just want to take the high spots off. And then you're going to be the judge of this. If you have a surface planer, or if you don't, you're just going to try to hand scrape this as even as you possibly can. If I feel this surface to me feels a lot smoother than this surface over here where I can still feel the glue. But I can notice that this piece of walnut definitely raised over this piece of maple. Again, if I want to, grit my teeth. Now, I know when I do this, there's tons of people who go like this, it's like nails on a chalkboard, stop it. Well, you kind of get used to it. There's a lot of things in woodworking that when you do it for the first time, you don't like it, and then you realize, well, if I don't do this, it's not getting done. Right now, this joint feels a heck of a lot better than it did before. As a matter of fact, if I go across this entire thing, you can see the glue here, that little bit of yellow glue, grit my teeth. And if you're using this paint scraper correctly, you should feel it right here in your upper shoulders. If you're going across, and I'm going to start to do it on this the way most people do it, Mr. Shimko, nothing's happening. It's not happening. Well, it's not happening because you have to use your body. Again, there's some things you have to stiffen up to. This happens to be one of them. That surface feels pretty darn good. This one, I'm going to clean up, but I'm going to clamp it down to the table because some people feel more comfortable if they work off of a work surface. So we're going to take this one, we'll go over to the work table, and I'll probably do the same thing on this side. I can kind of assess it. The problem that you have a little bit with these clamps is that I can't get really close to the edge here. That becomes difficult because the clamps kind of get in the way. So I'm going to go over to the work table to work on this. Let's take a look at the underside of this, which I think is as important as the top side. If I flip this over, you're going to notice several things here. You notice how the glue beaded up. You also notice some black sections here. What is the black section? It's the chemical reaction of the steel in that bar clamp and the polyvinyl acetate of this glue. It's going to leave those little black sections. It's not a lot to worry about because you could clean it up either by scraping it or planing it down. But it's one of those things that you should have on your pieces. That's telling you that there's enough glue that's on here. I always get worried when somebody says, I don't have any glue beads on my wood. That always is a point of concern for me because when I think about it, I'm going, is there enough glue on this? You really want to make sure you have enough as opposed to, I didn't put on a whole lot at all. I'm going to take this, I'll break this one down, moving the clamp handles to loosen it up. Counterclockwise, yes, thank you, crew, thank you. Counterclockwise, I'll loosen it up and I'll pull this cheese board out. That surface was not scraped. That cheese board, the surface was scraped. If I look at this, notice I have beaded glue on here. Now you should be thinking of that question that I asked you. What happened yesterday that was unusual about this? So keep that in mind. Let's glue over. Chortle. Let's go over to the old work table and we'll scrape these down. And this is where you'll probably be a little bit more comfortable. Of course, I'm in a shop where no one is at this time, so it's easy for me to clamp it. But most of the time, if you're working in the high school, there's 105 other students who are using the glue table in the facilities, so you usually don't have that luxury of I could clamp it and scrape it down at the same point on the glue table. All right, so this was the surface that I scraped already. This is a little bit high. I could probably leave that if I wanted to. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clamp this down and I'm gonna do the opposite surface and I'll do this board as well. You have a decision to make here. What's the best way to clamp this board down? If I take this, lay it down here, or do I take it and I clamp it this way? It's really up to you, and a lot has to do with the size of the board. Remembering that when I clamp this, it makes it a lot easier if I don't use a deep throw clamp on the surface because that clamp is eventually going to get in the way, whether I'm working on the left side or the right side. So what I would like to do is to use this bench pin into my hole, this bench dog from my vise, lift them up, put them together, and clamp the board in the middle of it. I can do it this way. Perhaps I can do it this way. Yeah, I think I can. You're a wise man if you take this bench dog and put it below the surface of the wood, because when I tighten the vise down, I have now a clear path to scrape across this entire surface. I'm going to do it that way, scraper. I'm going to bend my knees as opposed to nothing's happening. How come nothing? It's making my arms go funny. No. I grab hold of this like I want to do it. I grit my teeth. I hold this at a slight angle. Come over here, cameraman. This is what I had before. You notice that the glue marks from the clamps are a lot smaller. I can take that off simply by doing it a little bit more, gritting my teeth. I don't need necessarily to take it off unless I am just scraping this. Now in our shop, we have the luxury of one of these bad boys, our surface planer. So what I'm going to do is take off the excess and then we'll go over how to set up that surface planer for you. Let me finish up scraping this. Again, taking the high spots off. And I'm going to do the same exact thing to the other side. boy, this is hard. But thank goodness I did my push-ups today. Most of the projects that I select to do in here, I try to think of, can you use this? I can't tell you how many times this project has come up as, boy, that's a great idea. There's many things that you can do with this. I know years ago when my mother wanted a cutting board, she said to me, can you make me a little cutting board to make stuffed cabbage with? And on the stuffed cabbage, she had a cabbage that was maybe this size. She said she was cutting up onions. So what I did was I made her a cutting board that looked like this. Hold on. My mother was 90 years old. And when I made her a cutting board, I think mine was even bigger than this. What she did was she said to me, well, thanks, but how do I get it onto the counter? Because the thing is so big and so heavy. So that's when this cheese board idea was made. She only wanted something really to cut a cabbage and an onion, really didn't need a whole lot of room. So the cutting board is, yes, a good project, but this cheese board with the handle made it a lot easier for my mother to work on smaller things. Let's finish this up. This surface looks pretty clean. There's still a little bit of raised section and maybe a little bit of black from the clamp, but I'm going to see if I can make this work on the surface planer. Let me loosen up the vise, and I'm going to scrape this side. I always kind of do the worst side first. That's the underside because it's been beaded up. So I'll take it, flip it over, see if I can't clamp this the same exact way. When I was talking about using a deep throw clamp, if you don't have the luxury of having a bench pin and a bench dog, if you take the clamp, clamp it down, I can only do half of this, then I have to move the clamp to the other side. The other thing with a deep throw clamp, no matter how strong you are and how many push-ups you do, it always is just held in one spot. So if I put a lot of pressure on this side, a lot of times, because it's just held by one point, it'll rack to one side or the other. It'll kind of pivot. So I always like to support it this way. If I can get it on a bench pin and a bench dog, it makes it a little bit easier. Same thing, safety glasses, sleeves rolled up, bend my knees, grip my teeth, ha ha ha. As I go along. Again, you could still see the black sections. Do they have to come out? They don't. If I wanted to, I could take them out, or I could leave them because I've decided I'm going to surface this down. So now when I rub my hand across here, this feels nice and smooth. That's a good job. It's all I want to take off because I'm going to finish the rest of it on the surface planer. One thing I do want to tell you, if I were to say there's a common mistake with people using a paint scraper, that is if they take a section and they want to clean out glue here and it's in a joint. It bothers me when I see somebody tip one of these scrapers because what they're doing is they're cutting a channel into their wood. They're trying to get the glue out. But if I wanted to get the glue out in there, if I tip this paint scraper and I go in to get the glue out, that's really not that important. It is important that it's flat. I don't want to put a channel in this and cut a groove in it. I see some people do this. And I'm like, no, no, no. We want it flat. It's not like the glue that's on there all has to come completely out. So if I look at this, you notice that there's still little yellow sections, like this over here is a little yellow over there, maybe a little yellow over here. All the yellow doesn't have to come out. All you want it to be is for it to be flat and there's no raised section. I'm done with these. If you look at my scrap here that I've made, that sawdust, For 2 boards, that's not a whole lot. I took off just a hair, and these feel pretty smooth. Let's go now to the machining process. The first thing that I want to do with both of these is I want to surface them down. I want to try to get this clean a better way than I can do it. I'm going to use the surface planer. Let's take a walk over here. Years ago when I first started at Denellen, the state of New Jersey came in. They saw that we did some really good things. Not I did some really good things, you guys did some really good things. So they gave us a grant. They gave us $10,000 to spend the money any way we wanted. As a result, I said, what could these kids use in this shop more than anything? I got a few routers. I got the spindle sander. I got a bandsaw. And this was the big purchase, this surfacer. This surfacer was free to us. And it's one of those things that if you have a shop and you have one of these that work, it's probably the greatest thing. Because when we talk about machines and what they do, we went over the jointer, and I said to you, a jointer, is going to machine an edge. So I can go to the table saw, and I could rip it to width. Then, with these 2 edges being machined, I can go over to the miter saw, I can square an end, which we're gonna do shortly, and I can cut it to length. When I look at this machine here, I liken this surface planer to that joiner over there. The joiner has 3 cutting knives on 1 cutting head. When I run a board through the jointer, I'm cutting off and cleaning up the edge of a board. So if you look, here was the edge that I cleaned up. Here's the non-machined edge. As I run it across, the 3 cutters come around the head and they machine this to clean it up. The surface planer is kind of the opposite. Now what we're going to do is we're going to send a board through and it's going to clean up this entire surface. So think of that jointer as this machine just in the opposite. The cutters on the surface planer are on top of the machine. It's not a 6-inch wide cutter, it's an 18-inch wide cutter. So I could send a board up to 18 inches wide through this entire surface planer and it will make it less thick. So we have a jointer that joints the edge, table saw rips it to width, chop saw, radial arm saw, miter saw, square and end, cut to length. This is the machine that's going to make a board whatever thickness we want it to be. When boards are cut from a sawmill, it is cut to a certain size. They are all cut to a certain thickness. They all look awful and nasty. They take the boards, they send it through this machine right here. It's cut in the rough and it's surfaced down to whatever thickness we want. In our shop, it's 13/16 for hardwood, it's 3/4 of an inch for pine. And instead of us doing that with each individual board, when I get it from the sawmill, from our supplier, Rex Lumber, I specify what thickness I want it to be, and I always make the hardwoods 13/16 a little bit thicker than the softwood, so you guys will know the difference. Let's talk about adjusting this. All of these boards that I have made are 13/16 thick. I know that because when I glued it together, I had the surface facing up on all of them. Unlike that cutting board that I showed you before, that was 1.25 inches. So I want to set this so that I take off as little as I possibly can, and I want to clean up both sides. So the idea is not to take off 3/8 of an inch on one surface, 3/8 of an inch on the other surface, and then I have 1/16 of cheese board left. No, I want to take off as little as I possibly can. So the initial setting of this machine is actually critical. Here's the way I do it. I want to make sure that when I adjust this machine, did somebody try to attack me? I always want to adjust the machine on its upstroke. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'll ask the cameraman to do this. Let me move over some projects. Is to take a look at this pointer indicator, which is telling me the difference between the cutter and the table. If you look at this right here, it's set above an inch. What I want to do is I want to take the machine to make the initial setting of 13/16 of an inch. I want to take the machine, loosen up the gold knob, take the crank wheel, and I want to drop it below the level of an inch on here. An inch is definitely it's definitely more than the 13/16 of my thickness. I want you to notice something about this table when I move the crank wheel counterclockwise. You're going to notice that this table will usually drop a whole lot for a little adjustment. In other words, it goes down like this. It drops. I never want to make the adjustment, my last adjustment, on the downward stroke, because if it drops a lot, I don't know how accurate this reading is. So in order to do this, I want to go below an inch. I'm going significantly below an inch. And now what I want to do is I want to raise it up 2 lines above an inch. 2 lines above an inch, which would take me to 7/8 of an inch. To be accurate, I'm going to take my my bifocals out. I want to crank this up so I come up 2 lines above an inch. So right there, if you notice the setting of that indicator, that pointer indicator, it's about 2 lines above an inch. The next thing I want to do is wherever this handle lies, I'm going to add 1 complete turn clockwise. And our adjustment to raise the table up is always clockwise. So I'm going to turn it up 1 turn, and now I'm going to lock down the gold knob, which locks down the table. When I do this, that is my initial setting. What I'm trying to avoid is the sound that you hear in the summertime when they're cutting trees down and they send them through the chipper. I don't want to take off too much. As a matter of fact, I really don't want to take off anything on this. I just want to zero the cutter. One time I had a student, and I said to him, I want the board surface down to 3/4 of an inch. What he did was, his initial setting was 3/8 of an inch. Why? Because he didn't know how to read that ruler. When he sent the board through, it sounded like that chipper. He had 2 pieces to cut. When I heard that sound, I went nuts. I stopped everybody in the shop. I said, no, what are you doing? It's too much. It's too much. You can't do that. So I stopped him. I said, why did you do? I go, look at the setting. It's 3/8. It's not 3/4 of an inch. So he said, okay, boy, I'll never make that mistake again. So everybody goes back to work. Now I'm assuming that he's going to move it down to 3/4 of an inch. What does he do? There's a little rule on this. Whatever you do to one board, you always have to do to the second board. And what he did was turn the machine back on, send the second board to, what are you doing? He goes, you told me that whenever I'm surfacing 2 boards, whatever I do to one, I have to do to the other. No, I appreciate it. But you don't want to make that mistake twice. So here is my initial setting. Some other adjustments you should understand about this. This little knob, if I move it all the way to the right, engages the roller. Yes, the roller. This has an automatic feed. I'm going to take the board, I'm going to send it in. The roller is going to grab my board from my hand and send it through. This is an 8 horsepower motor. The last thing you ever want to do is to stick your fingers in, because if your fingers get caught in there and it's picked up by the roller, you might as well kiss your hands goodbye. As a matter of fact, I sent you an article about a shop teacher who had that done this past year. So I want to push this in, but I don't really want to go any further than this area. The other thing that I want to keep in mind is when I do this, I don't touch anything else. This roller over here on my right controls the speed. You don't have to worry about that, adjust that at all. The other adjustment that makes a little bit of an issue is this knob right here. For some reason, people play with this. This is a knob that will adjust the bottom roller a little bit up or a little bit down, depending on whether the board is being picked up. Right now, it's set exactly where it has to be. So you don't have to worry about the feed, the bottom roller adjustment, or the speed. The only two things I want you to, actually three things to understand, is the lock that locks in the table, the table height adjustment, which is this crank wheel, and the needle indicator. All set, I'm ready to send this in. I'm gonna start it up. Sleeves rolled up, safety glasses on. I don't think it really matters what side I do because I'm eventually gonna do both sides. But here's an important thing. When I take this board, I cannot offer it as a gift to the gods. I have to act like I own this machine. I don't walk over there and go, please take it. I'm gonna take this board and I'm gonna send it in like I mean it. Grit my teeth like I'm walking the streets of New York having a bad day. I take the board, I lay it flat. I always like to work on the left-hand side. I'm gonna push it in. Now, did it cut anything? I didn't hear it cut anything. And if I send this one through the same setting, I don't think it's gonna cut on that one either. So you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna raise the table up. Loosen up the gold knob. I'm gonna take this crank wheel. For this setting, I'm gonna turn it a half a turn clockwise. So here is my handle. There's a half a turn clockwise. I'm gonna send this in. Doesn't matter which one I use, I'll do it the same exact way. Don't offer it, take it like I own it. I'm listening just like I listened on the joiner. So it definitely cut a little bit. It definitely did. I'm going to do the same thing for this side. Does it matter? Should I use the handle first? I always like the bigger section first. Take it, I'm going to... Sometimes it might get caught depending on the grain or the underside of this. So now what I'm going to do, it's cutting. I'm only going to adjust it a quarter turn. Loosen up the gold knob, now a quarter turn. Now I'm going to send it through handle side first. Let's see if this works any better. Probably a little bit better. Wow, that made a big difference. It's definitely better than it was before. And I'll try this the same way. I'll go handle side since that worked out pretty well. So what I used is another board because it got caught up, just to push it through the other side. It's still not exactly even. Another quarter turn. I'll do it the same exact way. Up, up, up. Wood if you wanted to do that, but if you look at this now, this is a lot cleaner than it was before. I'm going to make another adjustment. Here's where it grabbed hold and didn't let it go. So we're definitely going to clean this up a little bit more. We're going to clean this side up as well. Another quarter turn. Up, up, up. That cleaned up my mark there. That's pretty good. Let's take a look at this side. I kind of have a chip there. I want to clean that up a little bit. This side isn't bad. Let's see if we can't make this better. So if I look at this grain, it kind of looks like the chip happened when I sent it through this way. So I'm going to put the handle through and let's see if it cleans it up. Oh, that sounded a lot better. Oh yes. Oh yes, not as deep a chip. But here's what's weird. This is better, but if you look at that walnut has a little bit of a chip to it. Let's see, do I do it again? I think so. I think I'm going to go another quarter turn. Which is the worst side? That's better. I think I'm going to send this side in. So now I'm looking at the grain. I think this one is done. That one looks pretty good. As someone once said in my class, this side still looks a little shoddy. And that sounded better as well. If I look, the only thing I have is that little bit of glue, that little mark from the clamp. But these are all nice and clean. So now the question is, do I send it through again? Instead of losing a whole lot of thickness, I'm all set. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to take these boards and I'm going to lay my template on top and actually make this thing look like a cheese board. How we doing with time there, cameraman? I think we're all set for today. What I'm going to do on next episode is we'll square this up, cut the shape out, and cut it to length. Hope you guys are still well. Any more questions with the Cheese Board Master? I'll be with you in a little bit.